materials that we're going to discuss here, you're going to get an email from our marketing team with all the information, a link to the recording, and the slides if you'd like to see. Another little piece of housekeeping right before we get started. If you have questions throughout the webinar, whether you're having a technical issue or if we're reviewing something and you'd like to ask a question, please use the question prompt, and I will monitor it as I can. Hopefully, I'll have time towards the end of the presentation to take some questions, but even if I don't, feel free to submit them and we'll make sure to get back to you. And especially if there's any issues with audio or visual, do use that question prompt to let us know. And on that note, we're going to get started. Welcome, everybody. You are here today for the 2014 crowdfunding campaign survey results. What are your peers doing? What kind of results are they seeing? And how is it working for them? So we're going to do a little bit of an intro first, tell us a little bit about who I am, who Kimbia is, what we do, and then we'll dive into the data. And I'll tell you a little bit about the data, how we got the data, who we asked in a little bit. So this is an agenda that I just told you guys about. Pleasure to meet you. This is a picture of me. I'm Miriam. I'm a senior fundraising principal here at Kimbia. I've got quite a few years experience in the industry. Started out back in the day in direct mail, moved on to digital and online fundraising, and now at Kimbia, I support all of our clients' initiatives in terms of how their programs can be successful and what elements of both fundraising and technical campaigns will get them there. At Kimbia, our mission, for those of you that may not be very familiar with us, is to empower the Philanthropy 500 to raise the funds needed to achieve their mission by providing the most technologically advanced digital fundraising solutions. What does that mean? It means that we work with organizations in all the different verticals that you may think of in the nonprofit space, including community foundations, major nonprofits, higher education. We also have a commercial race practice, some for-profit races like the Chicago Marathon, but also some nonprofit races. So what that means from a technology perspective is things like registration, online fees, and things like that. We were founded in 2007 right here in Austin, Texas. We've since helped over 19,000 organizations in supporting their fundraising campaigns. We have some patented widget technology, which means that our technology is very flexible and it's one line of code that you can take with you and paste wherever you like on your properties or other properties, and it's still secure, and it conforms to all of your various site design and site implementation. We also have some great support in terms of A/B testing and how portable the platform is. The next slide is going to show you a little bit more about that. We provide technology support in all the traditional fields of fundraising that you may think of, and outreach as well. So we've got traditional online fundraising, event registration, peer-to-peer and DIY. You may know us for Giving Day. Some of you may have heard or participated in Give Local America that took place in May, the largest nationwide crowdfunding Giving Day ever, almost $69 million. We'll look at that a little briefly. And of course, custom forms. So this doesn't just mean donation forms. It might mean registration forms, sign-up forms, multi-step and multi-language forms, all those kinds of things. I've mentioned already that one of the unique things about Kimbia is that we are a patented technology solution that embeds on any website and conforms to all the design. What that means is it removes a lot of the steps and clicks that your constituents have to take to interact with you, whether to donate or to sign up. That's why you see that point about conversion rate increasing by an average of 30%. We also have some other great functionality. I'm not going to read this to all to you guys. If you are interested in finding out more about some of this capacity, please feel free to reach out to us. Our contact information will be at the end of this webinar. But what I did want to point out to you are two items on this list. One is that all of our forms and functionality is natively mobile responsive. So if your page is mobile responsive, we will be as well. That line of code that you paste adapts and is already pre-built to respond to mobile. As we all know, mobile is very important. We'll see a couple of slides presentation, but we regularly see 20 to 40% of Giving Day traffic, for example, coming from mobile sites for organizations that are doing Giving Days with us. And we see in the range of 15 to 25% of donations coming from mobile either phones or tablets on the day of Giving Day. So mobile is very important, and that's why it's so important to have technology that is mobile enabled, not just on the form side, but on everything that you're sending out there, you know, your site, your emails, etc. We'll talk more about that. The other thing that I wanted to point out to everybody on the slide is this multi-currency section here. Cambia donation forms not only can transact in multiple currencies, and we have those available if you'd like to see that, but the donation form itself, the questions, the explanations are also available in multiple languages. So for those of you that either have perhaps parts of your nonprofit, chapters or affiliates or partners that are in other countries, or you have large supporter bases that are in other countries, maybe you have a lot of donors in Germany for some reason, or if you're a higher education institution, you have alumni in other countries, this is a great option and something great to know, that not only can we process those currencies in the home currency, but we can also present them a donation form in their own language. Again, if you'd like more information on this aspect, please feel free to reach out to us after the webinar, and we're happy to provide you more information. I'm not going to go in depth into this. This really isn't part of the webinar, but to me, as a fundraising strategist, as I think about things that make a difference to clients and that differentiate Cambia from some other platforms out there, I think on this page, these are two key things to point out. So on that note, guys, I'm done with the Cambia spiel, and I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking to you about what we saw in the results and why crowdfunding is important. Again, just a reminder, please use the question prompt if you have any questions along the way. Happy to try to answer them either as we go or at the end of the presentation. So why crowdfunding? As you can see, this is data on year-over-year growth for crowdfunding events, and this is from clients in Cambia. So these are folks that have had at least 2, but up to 5 years of Giving Days. So first of all, folks are having multiple Giving Days year over year. They are seeing great results in their first year, and they're saying this was a successful campaign. This worked within our overall marketing and fundraising schedule and campaign mix, and we believe this can be successful. And as they're growing year to year, you can see that every year something's learned, something different is tried, and double-digit growth. So year 2, clients that had second-year events compared to year 1, growth of over 21%. Folks that went on to have a year 3 event saw a tremendous 51% growth, and in even year 4 and 5, you're still seeing pretty high growth. Again, in each year, there's fewer clients included in that number because, you know, there's fewer clients who've had consecutive 3 years events and fewer clients that have had 4. But even year 1 to year 2, that's tremendous growth. For most clients, you know, we're talking first year in hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars for a year 1 event. So when we're seeing a 21% growth rate, that is pretty significant. And that's pretty important. Somebody just asked, how do we differentiate between crowdfunding and Giving Days? That's a great question. It's a great place to mention that. On one hand, a lot of folks use them interchangeably because Giving Days are a type of crowdfunding. There are all sorts of types of crowdfunding out there. It's a really big and also amorphous term right now. But Giving Days are a main type of crowdfunding event. So they happen to be time limited. They're usually an umbrella, so not a specific project for either a number of projects or a number of programs or campaigns. They can either be one organization or it can be multiple organizations. So that's a great question. Giving Days are not crowdfunding exclusively. Crowdfunding can incorporate other things, but they are a type of crowdfunding. Erin, if that didn't help with your question, let me know, and I can try to either clarify or follow up with you afterwards. Also, one of the great things that we're seeing, and I think this is really, to me, again, as a fundraising strategist, this is really what I am very excited about, is we see huge percentages of new donors to organizations from these events. So This is an example from the Community Foundations of Texas. This is an organization that has had, 6 years of, they started very early in this game. They were an early adopter. You can see just how quickly their program has grown as they've learned, more and more about how to make these things successful, as they've become better at marketing and publicizing their day. They are the leaders in this space. But what you can also see is just the great potential for new donor acquisition. So in 2012, for example, 20% of the folks that gave were new to the various organizations they were giving to, and almost 27% last year. So if we think on the landscape of fundraising and marketing, and we think of the more traditional channels, all of which are still important and should all be part of your marketing toolkit, how many of them are having this double-digit return on new donors? Direct mail is likely relatively flat. And again, I'm not knocking any of these channels. They're all very important to robust and successful marketing programs. And even online email acquisition and other channel acquisition, it's become harder and harder and less cost-effective to get that volume of names on your file. What we are seeing with these crowdfunding Giving Day events is significant volume of new folks that are activated. We'll take a look at who they are, because we may be thinking, okay, well, that's great. Maybe I get a whole ton of new donors, but maybe they're all $5 folks, and I don't really want them. We'll take a look a little bit later in this presentation about who these people are and are they really valuable. But even though this is just one example, we pretty consistently see these feedback from clients about what percentages of new donors they got. We just did a crowdfunding event with a client, and this was a fairly a campaign that was fairly in the middle of their cycle, towards the end of their fiscal year, and towards a file that had been really reached out to quite a few times. And we still got, I believe it was something like 15% new donors. So even though that may have been on the low end, that still speaks to the power of these giving days to reach out, not just your regular file, but to really engage those folks that are new to you, and then to get them into your cultivation stream. Also, I've talked about the revenue growth, but here's an example of another client, Columbia Giving Day. They were one of the leaders in the higher ed space in doing these crowdfunded giving days. They started out early on. As you can see, they are also seeing growth, not just in revenue, but also in donations. I think this is important to keep an eye on here, because, we could show you really big revenue growth, but maybe there's, $10 million sitting in there from one donor, right? So we really just went from 4 donors to 5 donors, but it looks like the revenue just grew exponentially. You can see in these numbers that it's not just the revenue, it's also the number of folks that are giving. And in Columbia's case, about 40% of those donations year over year are coming from new and lapsed donors. So also as a reactivation method for folks that maybe have become immune to your more traditional fundraising asks, this is a great way to also try to target them. And again, this is data that's being shown by the clients, that's being reported to us. So these are just us reporting the numbers to you. Another example of year-over-year growth in giving days, and that is a consistent trajectory right now, is Give Local America, which I mentioned. We started this in 2014. This is a day that happens, I believe, it's the first Tuesday every May. First year at $53 million, last year at $68.5 million. Average gift stayed fairly stable, but what you can see is the mobile. I mentioned this earlier, the percent of donations that came in from mobile grew double-digit year over year. The percent of the increase is double-digit increase year over year. The number of gifts also grew. So it's very important to keep in mind, if you're thinking of doing a crowdfunding event, how are you going to enable those donors and those visitors to interact with you? If it's during a weekday and I'm on the go and I get your email on my iPad, am I going to be able to read that email because it's mobile optimized? If I click on my iPad that I want to give to you and I land on a giving page, is that page, not just the form, but the whole page and experience, mobile optimized so that I can view it easily? Those are very important things to keep in mind, because the data doesn't lie. 20% of donations last year of $68.5 million, on a mobile people came in from either a mobile phone or a mobile-enabled device. Those are really high numbers when you start talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. So I've mentioned that we're going to talk to you a little bit about, why is crowdfunding important? What's the data there that supports that it's a valid and growing and important channel to be fundraising in? Now we're going to talk about who is giving to these crowdfunding events, and then we'll also have a section about what folks that have been doing this for a couple of years are telling us, and also what we're seeing in terms of how they are raising that money during crowdfunding days, how they are marketing, what's working for them, what's not working, and some thoughts on, if you're going to go ahead and do this, whether it's your first year, whether it's your fifth year, some best practices on ways to proceed. So who is donating? This data came from a data overlay that we did for the 2014, not the 2015, Give Local America Giving event. So that means that there was folks from, and also we included some folks from various higher education events and some foundation days. So almost 20,000 nonprofits, over 150,000 names included. So from the perspective of, was this a broad read on who is giving? Yes. This wasn't just looking at 14 events that had a total of, 5,000 people give. This was over 150,000 people that were all over the country and gave to all kinds of nonprofits and all sorts of events. So as I mentioned, crowdfunding has worldwide appeal. So individually in the United States, we drew donors from all 50 states and even 53 countries. You can see the donor density and distribution here. I think that to those of you that have looked at these demographic maps for more traditional channels before, you're not going to find this very surprising. You see the heat maps along the coast and in urban centers in the middle of the country. We usually see that as well on more traditional channels. But again, this shows that this is an appealing type of fundraising and an appealing type of event to the more traditional types of donors, as we'll see, also to younger donors and more engaged donors and donors that are more exclusively online. Importantly, what I want you guys to notice on this slide is that not only did all age demographic give to these kinds of events, but the key demographics of 45 to 64. This is really important. We hear a lot of talking about millennials and Gen Xers and whether or not they'll get engaged or not. And we certainly see here that on giving days in that age group, we've got about 30% of folks giving. But what I think is really important here are the boomers. And boomers were almost 50% of the people that gave. Now, why is that important? Because to me, boomers are the current holy grail of our industry. We've got the 65-plus-year-olds who are the majority of most of our giving files right now. They are the bread and butter of direct mail programs. And for many, many years, they have been the ones that we've been marketing to and targeting because they are of the retirement age. They have those disposable funds. This age of 45 to 64 demographic, the boomers and the late Xers, are the folks that are coming into that age. They are the ones that are looking at retirement. They are the ones that are looking at disposable incomes, and they are the ones that we want to get right now. So what we see here from these giving days is that they are very, very engaged in this kind of fundraising. And I have a question. Yes, these statistics are based on somebody asked if these stats are based on Give Local America. They are based on Give Local America, as well as a handful of higher education giving days that we've had in the last couple of years, and some foundation giving days. Okay. So again, look at the number of boomers that are giving to this. Also, great number of millennials and early Xers, but I was very excited when I saw this data because I thought, wow, if I'm sitting there saying, how am I going to build my program? How am I going to replenish some of that bleeding that I have out of my file that just happened? And frankly, how am I going to replenish some of the older folks that are either becoming more limited in their income or maybe their families are starting to manage their finances? How am I going to build for growth? And I thought that this specific demographic was really tremendous in showing where those people are. Also, what we found when we did the demographic overlay is that, who are these folks? They are wealthy. And these are just the online donors, guys. We're not counting here, the folks that called up and said, I'm going to write a $4 million check. So this doesn't even include those people because we have no way of overlaying them. This is who we have in Kimbia and who we know. So just the folks that filled out an online donation form, 48% of them had a net worth of over $500,000, and 50% had a household income between $100,000 and $4 million plus. Again, if you were to ask me, hey Miriam, who would you want as your ideal donor or donor prospect? I would tell you I want somebody wealthy, and I want somebody digitally savvy, and I want somebody not only with a high net worth, but who has great income. Well, what we see here is that we get a ton of those donors. It's also wonderful that we get a lot of donors in the lower dollar demographics. You certainly want everybody that is willing to give to you, whether it's at $5 or at $100,000. But we do see that these giving days skew wealthier, more digi-savvy, and certainly across age ranges. Finally, it's interesting to note, again, I don't think that this would be new to you guys. For those of you who have looked at who your donors are in more traditional fundraising channels, community ties certainly motivate support. So 73% of donors are homeowners and 54% are married. I don't think this is a surprising demographic about donors in general, but certainly I think with some marketplace perceptions that crowdfunding events only attract very young people at very low gifts, we see that that's just not true. That the demographics are telling us otherwise. And what types of organizations do they support? All sorts. These are just some of the types of organizations that are supported. You can see here that Human Services is leading the way. This is also partially a result of who participated in things like Giving Local America, and were most of them Human Services. We definitely had a lot of Human Services organizations, but we've also worked on giving days with all sorts of organizations. We had a giving day last December with an arts organization out of Houston. We just had one with a international organization that provides international relief, and we see them successful across the board. So this isn't this only fits foundations or this only fits higher education type fields. You can see that donors are more than happy to support all sorts of different causes that we work with, and by we I mean all of us here in the phone work with. Just a couple of other numbers that we thought were interesting. Sometimes the more data, the better. 59% of donors are female. Again, I don't think any of us are surprised at this. What I found very interesting was that 54% of them had 4 more years of college education. So we're also getting donors that are thinking about their giving and probably taking the time to understand who you are and what you do. 41% made a charitable donation in the past. And as we noted, for all of these donors, this isn't just Giving Local America, but for all of these different events that we looked at, 17% made donations via mobile devices. So, again, think about your own life. Think about how you're interacting with various just websites and shopping experiences, and then think of your donors and that they want to interact that way as well. So we also found that wealthy crowdfunding donors mean high average gift values. So we're just going to show you a comparison of online average gifts for most of these days, $139. Total average gifts, so this is if you include both, online and offline, and once the matching gifts and prizes are involved, then you get about $211. But that, again, includes a lot of money. That's matching money and incentive money. I think $139 as an average gift online is pretty good. I would take that. So here we have a question on the previous slide. Let me go back. I'm trying to go along as we I'm not sure what the name is, but somebody asked, so 59% have never given to anything before. Did I understand that? So you're saying, you're taking this 41% number and saying, 100 minus 41. I don't know that that means that necessarily. I think some folks might have taken the question as whether or not they've, I'm sorry, this is the demographic overlay, right? So for some of them, we may just not have had that information available. You know, when you send this information to the data places and you tell them, here, find all of these people, they certainly have all of the data that they've built. And I would say that things like whether or not you've made a charitable donation are one of the hardest things to append, because that requires getting data from other nonprofits and getting the person in the data bank. It's not as easy as finding out things about you, like how old are you, from national data banks. So I would, you know, I see where you're coming from on this, but I probably wouldn't make that leap. I would probably just say that that's what we were positively able to ascertain, that at least 41% of these people made a charitable donation in the past based on the data available about them, but I would assume that this would be much higher. If that still doesn't make sense, feel free to ping me and we can talk about this after the webinar. An added bonus of crowdfunding events, and one of the things that I think I've been saying here in a roundabout way with all the data that I've been showing you, is that these appeal to all layers of your giving ladder, from the smallest folks, the $5 folks that we still love, to the moves management pipeline folks, the major donors. And the interesting thing that we're finding for major donors is that there's a long tail effect with these folks post-giving days. You know, hearing about them and seeing how they work and the excitement and all the different layers of the organization that becomes involved, major donors get pretty excited. And they think to themselves, wow, this is really great. Look at how unique my organization is being. Look at all these great new things that they're trying to motivate folks and to tell our stories. So just a couple of examples of how this has worked for you guys in the past. Columbia, you know, not only did they receive a $2.5 million donation during their giving day as a single gift, afterwards at a dean's reception for the college, somebody was saying about something about their giving day. This was a couple of years ago, and saying, hey, you know what, we raised for the college, we raised about $2 million. It was really exciting. The major donor who heard all this said, wow, that's really, really great. I love that you guys are doing this, and he matched that money on the spot. So he wasn't involved in Giving Day. He didn't give any money on Giving Day. When he heard about it later, he got very excited and matched the money for the college. Give Minnesota raised nearly $6 million from major donors in matching funds. So again, big bucks there for Give MN. And this is the North Texas Giving Day that we just talked about. They secured over $2 million from major donors in bonus funds and high schools. Major donors really like contributing to these sorts of things and feeling like they are part of this process. Again, if you have thoughts or questions about major donors and how they get involved in this and how this all works out, feel free to contact us afterwards for more information. So we've kind of talked about the data of Giving Days in terms of the revenue and the growth. We've talked a little bit about who gives to them. And then we said to ourselves, you know, there's not really a ton of data or information out there from clients about what are they doing. We know what's working and we know what we tell clients to do and best practices, but we're all pretty early in the game on this. You know, this is a fast evolving industry. Let's ask clients, how are they doing? What are they doing? What's working on their side? So keep in mind that the data we're about to look at is self-reported. You know, we ask questions and they answered, and then we compile the data. We sent it out in 2015. To nonprofit, community foundation, higher education fundraisers, asking them some key questions. And so I'm just going to show you what they told us, and then we'll talk about also some of those proven practices that we've seen working over and over again. So of those we surveyed, 67% have hosted an online crowdfunding event, which means 33% haven't. And of the 33% that haven't, we asked them, hey guys, why haven't you? You know, is it because you're just not interested? Is it because, you know, something doesn't work for you? Is it because you're planning to? So of the 33% that told us they hadn't, 53% said, no, we haven't, not because we're not interested, but because we have, you know, we're planning on it, or we're still convincing our board, things like that. Okay. And then we got some also responses asking for the 67% of folks that have had an event, what's worked for you? What have you tried? What haven't you tried, right? What we found out, and guys, we already know this. This is what we would tell you if you were working with us and you said, what do I need to do to have this kind of event? But getting that feedback from folks and seeing it is a reinforcement of the fact that these are best practices. So matching funds and prize pools create a sense of urgency and raise revenue. So we see an average of a $12 return from what these folks reported they had in prize money compared to how much they raised. So an extra $12 raised for each dollar matching funds and prize pools. We see that for organizations, that the size of the prize pool is pretty important. For organizations that reported that they didn't meet their fundraising goal, their average matching fund or prize pool was about $18,000. For organizations that met or exceeded their revenue goals, their average prize pool was about $153,000. Keep in mind, guys, this is of course relative to the size of your organization. If you have, 1,000 people in your file, you're not going to get a prize pool in the millions of dollars. But if you have a really large organization, if you have hundreds of thousands of donors on your file, and you're going to tell them that you're going to match the first $10,000 of gifts, they're going to think to themselves, you're going to meet that in the first 2 seconds, and then my money isn't going to matter, or at least the incentive isn't going to be there. So just keep in mind that this is all relative and important to personalize for your organization. Also, as I talked about, I showed you guys that some organizations are getting a ton of new donors. We saw that in Columbia's case, the combination of new and reactivated was 40%. For the organizations that we surveyed, about 80% actually tracked whether or not folks were new or not. And for those folks that tracked it, about 26%, they reported about 26% of donors who gave to Giving Days were new. This is something you can track really easily on the Kimbia donation form. If you are tracking this, just ask them. You can also, of course, then take that data and integrate it into your CRM or database of record if you have one, and do a record reconciliation and see if they're new to you, and then you don't have that as a self-reported item. But a really easy way to track this in a self-reported way on the donation form is to just add a question. Really easy to do. We also asked how many folks are closing the loop and onboarding those new donors after the Giving Day to the organization. As we all know, it's not about one time. It's not about just that one instance where I'm going to have this Giving Day, I'm going to get all these new donors, woohoo, and then the next thing they're going to see from me is another ask 6 months from now, and they haven't heard from me, they don't know who I am, or maybe they forgot that they gave to me, and I'm going to completely turn them off by just dumping them into my fundraising pool. So we asked folks, how many of you are using the cultivation tactics that we know work really well? Welcome series, customized messages, some sort of engagement email talking about, how their money is going to be used and how it will help, ongoing newsletters, the impact of their donations, in-person events. And as you can see, the most popular thing that folks are doing is welcome emails. I would have liked, again, this is self-reported, I would have liked to have seen a lot of these be much higher. So clearly, this shows me that we still have some work to do as an industry for those of us that are doing Giving Days to really think about closing that loop. Somebody asked, what are the things included in other? Kelly, I know that you're on the phone and you have access to the data. I don't remember if we offered folks the opportunity to write in what other was and if we got any of those answers, or if we just had them select others. So Kelly, if you could chat me what the answer to that is, then I can follow up. I just don't recall, guys, if we, they wrote it in. So Kelly, if you want to just shoot me a couple of items of the types of things people wrote in, I can just read them out in a second. Then we asked folks, email campaigns. Are you guys doing email campaigns to promote these events and to ask for money for these events? And if so, how much money are folks how much money you're raising from emails? We always tell people that emails are really important as part of Giving Day promotion a lot of emails. If you work with us, we give you a whole schedule. But we ask folks, hey, are you doing emails? And if so, how are they contributing to your revenue mix? So what we found here is that nearly half of organizations receive more than 50% of revenue via email campaigns. And you can attribute this all sorts of ways, but direct email. 93% of organizations ran an email campaign, and only 66% of organizations tracked revenue from email campaigns, which, you know, my best practice to you is if you're going to set up all these things and have all these campaigns, make sure you are tracking them and you've planned for that ahead of time, because sometimes tracking afterwards can be really, really hard, so that you can know, hey, what's working for me, what's not working. We sent a 7-part email series. Which one of them worked? Did people give right after the email went out? You know, when did people open most of my emails? What have I learned for this year that I can apply to next year? I have an onboarding question here. I guess this is on the previous slide. Do you know which tactic donors found the most effective? We didn't ask that question in the survey. A lot of folks don't necessarily track that, but I will tell you that from my perspective, for folks that are coming in through email, onboarding tactics that are really important that we know, generally speaking, work, is onboarding needs to match the acquisition channel, right? So if somebody responded to an email that you sent out and gave to your giving day, traditional fundraising practices still apply. You then onboard them via email and build out the other channels around that. So you send them an email welcome series. You add them to your e-newsletter. You also, in that email welcome series, tell them about all of the different properties. You know, you tell them about how they become engaged with you on social media. You tell them about maybe your event practice and how they can find out about that. And if they gave you, you know, enough money, maybe you set yourself a limit of $50 plus, you also make sure to mail them a receipt and maybe mail them a thank you letter with a response device in it should they want to give. Okay. So as I was saying, email has worked really, really well for folks in driving and generating revenue. That's why having an email campaign is really important. We're finding that that kind of centers and anchors all of the other activities that you're going to do around the giving day, not for all organizations, but for a majority of them. Also, I know this might sound antithetical because we talk about over-contacting and when it's too much, but we're finding with these crowdfunding giving days that a lot of email contact is really important. There's certainly a schedule and a calendar, and we can talk about what that means. But, you know, organizations that had multiple emails were 2.5 times more likely to meet or exceed their goals if they sent promotional emails, if they actually said, we're going to contact our people. Those folks that sent 4+ emails, and this means, you know, a couple emails before giving day, maybe a couple emails on giving day, maybe an email or two afterwards, were 8 times more likely to exceed their goal than those that didn't. And, you know, folks that only sent 1.3 emails, not as likely to meet or exceed their goals. So we can talk about this more if you'd like to have an in-depth conversation. But not only is this self-reported by clients, but I see this on events that I work on. When we have a robust email schedule that promotes the event before, that promotes the event multiple times during the day, and that thanks folks after, we definitely get more successful results. For those of you, for somebody that asked what were some of the other onboarding events that folks or activities that folks wrote in that we had under the other bucket, on this slide over back here. Kelly is telling me that some of those were social media thank you, a handwritten thank you, and mailed a welcome packet. Social media, we also know that social media is a very important aspect of giving events and crowdfunding. You know, you're asking everyone to share and post, you're posting and sharing yourself. So we asked the organizations in our survey how many of you use social media. Almost everybody did, so even a higher percentage than email. Although only about half of them track the revenue from social media. So the question here becomes, if you're doing this stuff on social media, how do you know if it's successful? If your goal is to raise money, or if your goal with your crowdfunding event, because for some folks the goals aren't necessarily to raise money, it's to get people to sign up or raise their hand or do something else, or participate in some way. It's not always revenue driven. How do you know if that's working if you're not tracking how that's going for you? So I think the thing that was really stood out to me from this part of self-reported feedback was it's wonderful. Everybody understands that social media engagement is very important and spends time on it, but folks aren't necessarily doing the work to track it and understand it so they can learn and evolve. Okay. How much revenue was generated from social media by organizations that participated on social media? So we had about 40% of organizations generate about a quarter of their revenue from social media. That's kind of what we see. We don't see a ton of organizations where most or the majority of their revenue is coming from social media, but it's certainly an important aspect of driving revenue, but also supporting other channels. Maybe I first saw a post on social media, then I went to your Giving Day page a week beforehand. I signed up to get a reminder email from you. I got that reminder email and I gave. So, the direct source is email, but certainly an attributed source is social media. So, I would take a quarter of that revenue any day. Mobile, talking about this. So about all the organizations that we surveyed and we asked them, what are you doing with mobile? About 65% received more than a quarter. That's more than 25% of their site traffic on Giving Day via mobile devices. So almost everyone. And 78% of sites were mobile optimized. So I think, from this tells me the industry has heard the message, seen what works loud and clear. Mobile is here to stay. This is how folks are interacting, not just with charities, not just with fundraising events, but generally with their digital experience. So we need to be the same. We need to be there with them in that medium. What percent of donations came from mobile? So that was traffic, how many people are coming, are you mobile optimized? But year over year, this is now data that we're looking in Cambia, right? So this isn't self-reported data anymore. This is us saying of the money raised online, because we can track what kind of form was used. I'm sorry, not form. We can track what kind of device pinged our mobile form. You can see the percent of donations coming in via mobile is growing double digits every year. So far in 2015, we know the year isn't over yet. We're seeing pretty strong growth over 2014 with almost 20% of donations coming in from mobile. So this is growing every year. It's important, and I expect that this year when we close out 2015 and we update this graph in gray, we'll see that percentage is even higher. Also, what we're learning is that, I've mentioned social, I've mentioned email. As we all know, it's an omni-channel world. There's a ton of different channels, and organizations that are being very successful at Giving Days are using all of those channels that are appropriate for them. It's not to say that you have to go out there and make a list of every single possible way you could reach out to somebody or fundraise money from them and then just go full blast. You need to understand what has worked successfully for you in the past, or what would you like to innovate and try, knowing what the fundamental pillars are, the social media, the email, and then make that work for you. So when we ask folks what else of the folks that met their fundraising goals or exceeded them, what channels did you use? We found that a lot of them used a variety of integrated and offline channels, and this is just a mix of various things: events, corporate sponsors, radio, phone. So this isn't the answer, it doesn't say you must use all of these things, but successful organizations integrated the things that work for them. Some folks, when we had a client last summer, it was a very strong radio campaign in the summer, so they had a mini Giving Day, and it was largely driven by the radio campaign that they had going to their giving site, supported by email. So in their case, radio to donation form was the key fundraising method. Because they understood what works for them, they understood the dynamics of their campaign, and they made it work. So some conclusions based on this: offline channels can and do drive online revenue. Organizations that didn't meet their goal used primarily direct mail. So they basically said, we are just going to market this via offline, and not surprisingly for Giving Day that largely lives as the hub online, that didn't work. About 2.5 channels on average were used by events that met or exceeded their goals, with the maximum number being 6. So I'm saying you don't have to deploy on every single possible channel out there. Just use the right mix for you. But look beyond just digital and social. And 1.5 channels on average were used by organizations that didn't meet their goals. Okay. So to summarize, what's working? What should you be doing? Incentives and prizes and matching pools are really important, and major donors and corporate sponsors are a great source for these funds. We know that crowdfunding events can and do drive new donors, but importantly, you have to close that loop. Think about what you're going to do with them after the event. How are you going to talk to them? How are you going to bring them into the fold? We also know that this can be a great way to reactivate lapsed donors. But again, same as with new donors, you have to have a follow-up plan of how you're going to keep these folks, now that they've reactivated, how you're going to keep them engaged in your program. Double-digit growth. This is not a one-off. This isn't just cannibalization. This isn't just moving money around. This is a consistent channel and marketing campaign that isn't replacing any fundraising campaign that you already have going, but is a great supplement to make that pie, that fundraising pie, even bigger. Mobile transactions are really important. And also, we found that only 28% of folks that responded had a peer-to-peer aspect as part of their crowdfunding event. So, I have my own little personal fundraising page. I can ask all my friends and family. So in terms of what's next and where should folks be looking and how should they be optimizing if they already have these great events, peer-to-peer and folding that into the tools available on Giving Day are certainly a direction that we're talking to clients to and a direction that folks are going in. For the folks, I told you there was 33% of folks who said they haven't had a crowdfunding event, and we asked them why. And, we kind of had half of folks telling us that of the main responses that people did respond to, we had folks telling us, about 30% didn't have any budget, 30% didn't have any time, and a lot of folks said we're already planning to do it next year, we're evaluating, things like that. So, given what the data is telling us about the potential for these events in the industry, and generally speaking, how much we see these things cost to deploy, it may be worth having that conversation again or finding out more information. We can help you if the stumbling block is either budget or lack of time. So a couple of things that you'll be getting post the webinar. This is all I have to share with you today. We have about 9 minutes. I'm hoping that I've answered a lot of the questions along the way. But if you have any, now is a great time to type them in. So post this webinar, you will be receiving a download identifying the crowdfunding donor. So you're getting a much deeper, some more information about the demographic overlay that we did and who these folks are. You will also be getting a follow-up article, The Ultimate Recipe for Cooking Up Crowdfunding Success. So talking about some of these best practices that I've just reviewed with you guys. We'll also be giving you, also if you are kind of thinking, I don't know about this, let me see, an easy way to check out some other crowdfunding events that are going on is to dip your toe and do something during Giving Tuesday or during Give Local America. And also, next week, we will be hosting a webinar where we'll be talking about how to build your crowdfunding budget, how to build that kind of awareness for your event, how to strategize around your crowdfunding success. If you go to kimbia.com, under resources, there's a little webinar tab, and you can register there. It's free to you. Laurie Freeman, who is our Vice President on the foundation side and runs the Give Local America team, and has very deep experience in all this. We'll be talking through some of these details, and I'm sure it'll be a great webinar. So if we have any questions, I'm going to check now. Also, my contact information, Kimbia's contact information, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions, thoughts, need any clarification on the data. Again, thank you everyone for attending today. I'm just going to check here and see if we have any questions. Give folks a few seconds to type them in. Otherwise, just look for some emails from us with all the information, and thanks again for joining us today. All right, so it looks like we don't have any questions coming in. Kelly, I'm going to end the webinar. Thanks again, everybody.